Hello. I think we're about ready to make a start. My name's Matthew Metcalf. I work for Groundsure in the Insights sales team. I'm sat next to Philip Norville from Dynasafe BACTEC, and the webinar's going to be mainly focused on the process of once you've got your detailed risk assessment after the preliminary risk assessment. It's the process of the next steps on kind of if there's any kind of site investigation processes and how Dynasafe BACTEC can advise on that after the risk assessment. So I'm going to pass over to Philip. One moment, here we go, Philip.
Thank you, Matthew. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Today's session follows on from two very successful UXO webinars that we've delivered with our partners at Groundsure in the last 12 months. The previous sessions were very much based around why you might wish to consider a UXO risk, how you would go about undertaking a preliminary risk assessment, and how you would commission a UXO specialist to undertake a detailed risk assessment. Both preliminary and detailed risk assessments are available via ourselves and also via our partners here at Groundsure. We will be recording today's session, and at the end of the session Groundsure will advise of the details of when and where it will be available, and I'm hoping that we will be about 40 to 45 minutes today with an opportunity at the end for question and answers. Feel free to type your questions at any time, but if they are answered during the session, if you could please delete them, as the question box that I see is not the most user-friendly interface, and at the end of the session it'll help me just to not have to scroll through hundreds of questions that have already been answered. Okay, let's make a start. Sorry, my slides aren't changing. There we go. Okay. Dynasafe BACTEC, UK's leading unexploded ordnance specialist. We've been established over 25 years, delivered over 5,000 projects in 50 countries, primarily the UK, but also countries in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa. We offer the widest range of services to the construction and development industries, and we have a full land and marine capabilities. We were recently bought by the Dynasafe Group, and that also, as I will explain later on, gives us some unique advantages compared to some of the competitors in the UK operating in the UXO sector. So the first thing to consider is why is UXO potentially a risk? It's 75 years since the Blitz, it's 70 years since the Second World War finished. People often say, you know, why should I be considering these items? The reality is, as an industry, we're still finding these items very, very frequently, and these items were all designed to explode. And dependent upon the type of item, the size of the charge that's there, the explosion can possibly kill, certainly cause significant injury to people or wildlife, animals, or possibly to destroy or damage or disable infrastructure and various other assets. The likelihood of accidental detonation of these items is typically low, but accidental detonation does occur, and should detonation occur, then the consequences can be very, very serious. As such, UXO is one of the risks that you should consider on a project at the earliest possible stage. Evaluate the level of risk, and if you have an unacceptable level of risk, or if it's not sustainable on your project, then this risk needs to be managed and mitigated accordingly. So this is a slide that literally took 5 minutes to put together a couple of days ago. These are all bomb finds in 2017, and these are all really just the tip of the iceberg. There's been some quite large items found this year, 250, 500 kilo bombs. There's also been a number of smaller items, mortars, grenades and the like. But thankfully, none of the headlines there are relating to significant deaths or casualties. We've got a very good approach in the UK to look for ordnance during the construction process, and if ordnance is found, it can be handled in a very safe and systematic process. As you might notice, some of those locations are from around the UK. This is not just a problem that affects London and the South East. 2017, Dynasafe BACTEC have found close to 1,000 items already this year. Sounds a lot, but when you find a box up in the top left of the screen there of hundreds of small arms and rifle rounds, the numbers can get quite big quite quickly. But we've also been involved with a number of projects this year where we found dozens, if not more, of things like grenades, mortars, and landmines. Some of the competition have found a couple of large bombs this year. We haven't found any ourselves this year. And the two on the screen here, I would have to suggest are both potential near misses. The job in Birmingham, the client and the client's design team had evaluated the project as a low risk site, and then a 250 kg bomb was unearthed on site. We'd worked with the contractor on that site on a number of previous projects, and we'd actually undertaken some training for the guys. So once the piece of ordnance was found, they knew exactly what to do in terms of how to handle it, how to call it into the police, who then passed it on to the MOD, who took over the project. Interestingly, that piece of ordnance was actually destroyed on the building site itself, and there's a good video on YouTube of showing it being detonated. Most large items like that have the fuse removed whenever possible, and then the defused item is removed from site, taken to something like a quarry or maybe a large open field where the farmer's given them permission, and the item is then detonated. The project on the bottom of the screen is in London, and this was on a site that a UXO specialist had provided clearance to the developer on the site. Then, as you can see in the background, a number of piles had been installed, both bearing piles for the high-rise development that was going to go on there, and also contiguous walls around the edge of the site. The bomb was found in an area that hadn't been cleared by the UXO contractor, and subsequently the item was defused and then removed from site by the army. This is the last large bomb that we found, which is just over 12 months ago, found in Bath. That's a 500-pound bomb or a 250 kg bomb. That was found on a Thursday before the bomb squad mobilised to site on the Friday. On this instance, they removed the fuses from the side of the bomb, as you can see there, and then they could tow it away in the back of that trailer to a quarry ahead of detonation. So lots of items are still being found on an annual basis. We've all got responsibilities under various health and safety legislation, under various regulations and acts, and as construction professionals we also have specific duties under the CDM regs, last updated in 2015. None of these bodies of work will actually say thou shalt or you must look for a UXO. Within there, though, are very good frameworks about how to identify a risk, what risks may affect your project, and then how to go about managing them and mitigating them. We're talking today really about when we're out on site, so not so much for the designers. And at this stage, it is the principal contractor's responsibility for delivering the project safely. The principal contractor, we're assuming at this point, has been issued a detailed risk assessment that the design team has undertaken, and that will have in it various recommendations of how the risk should be mitigated. So the principal contractor will create a construction stage plan at this point, ensuring that everybody on site is inducted, is aware of the risk, that emergency plans and procedures are put in place so that if an item is found, everybody knows what to do, there's no need to panic, and everybody can safely move away from the immediate work area, and then everything can be escalated to the forces to come and deal with the item. I've mentioned in the legislation that there's very little there's no specific reference to UXO. And as an industry as a whole, we've got very little relating to UXO. The approach of managing UXO is entirely voluntary. The Syria guidance C681 is probably the best document that's out there. There are a number of the other guides, but whereas the Syria guidance is over 100 pages long and covers every step of the process, some of the other guidance out there is a handful of pages long and really just introduces a few of the techniques and things that you should consider. Now, the Syria guidance was first commissioned in 2007 and published in 2009, so about 10 years old, but it is still the best information out there. The techniques, the technologies have improved slightly, but they certainly haven't had a radical overhaul, so it's still the best guidance to go to. It's not intended to make a non-UXO specialist into a specialist, but it should allow you to understand the risks on your project, understand various different approaches and techniques so that you can select the right approach for your project. It was originally published because there were some less than scrupulous companies out there and they were trying to steer people with limited knowledge down to maybe inappropriate techniques. And I would mention that that's probably just as relevant now. As an industry, we've never been busier with the number of items that are being found. High-rise buildings are increasing, therefore piled foundations, general basements are going deeper than they ever have in the past. And as such, we're going into areas of ground that were never previously cleared after the war or during sort of construction up until recently. So preliminary and detailed risk assessments have been undertaken. They've highlighted an elevated level of risk on the project, and as such, going to the site investigation stage or going to actual construction sites to commence work, various risks need to be considered. Now, this slide is guilty of stating the obvious, and that is that large items tend to be deeper than small items. But it's worth noting that it's not as straightforward as that. You can find large items at quite shallow depths. The bomb in Birmingham recently was found about 1 metre and 1.5 meters deep. The recent find we had in Bath was a similar kind of level, and these were large items that you would have expected maybe to go deeper. Obviously, the type of soil that you have on your site will also affect how deep items can go. Dense gravels, rocks tend not to be penetrated quite as deeply, whereas soft cohesive soils, alluvium, you've got greater penetration depth. As well, it's also worth considering it's not just items that were dropped by the Luftwaffe during the war. There's our own defensive items on there, things like anti-aircraft projectiles, rifle rounds, mortars, things that we may have fired as a defensive measure, or we may have placed as an area denial measure, such as a minefield or improvised sort of mines to prevent people taking over properties we wish to protect. So having commissioned your detailed risk assessment, we've identified there's potential UXO on the project. We've identified that the construction methodologies may encounter buried items, and there's a receptor. That could be a person, that could be the equipment being used to undertake the work, it could be assets and infrastructure going through the site, or various other issues. So we will mitigate the risk to reduce these components accordingly. And it's absolutely worth mentioning at this point that mitigation activities should only be carried out by UXO specialists. A small number of projects each year we'll get called out to, and we'll find a piece of ordnance not in the area it was located, and that might be somebody on site has deemed it fit to be moved and has moved it from one side of the site to the other. It may be that a contractor has employed somebody with some kind of ground probing radar or some other technique, but not really designed for locating ordnance. These things happen, and to date we've been lucky that unqualified people moving ordnance or looking for ordnance hasn't caused any injuries that we're aware of. But if you are doing this kind of work at this stage, always ensure it is a recognised UXO specialist. As I mentioned earlier on, the main contractor should have emergency response planning on site, and that can be during site investigation works where the main contractor might not be your more traditional contractor. It might be the site investigation arm of a consultancy, it may be a specialist site investigation consultant, or it may be another party. Make sure the risk of UXO is clearly explained to everybody that will be working on site, and that includes visitors as well as people undertaking work. Ensure there's some kind of induction process, and if at all possible, ensure you undertake a toolbox talk specific to this type of risk. If a piece of ordnance is located, make sure that the supervisor knows how he's going to safely evacuate the area, where he's going to evacuate the people to, and how he's going to escalate the process. That may be phoning back into the office, it may be phoning the police immediately, dependent upon the level of risk and what's been determined in advance. Once we're on site, there are a number of techniques that we can employ to manage the risk, to mitigate things accordingly, and I'm going to go through those now sort of step by step. The Syria guidance and the health and safety guidance is very much about taking a proactive approach to clearing items or potential items from site, but they also refer to a LARP, as low as reasonably practicable. On many projects, especially things like the site investigation stage, mobilizing a piece of equipment to site, mobilizing a number of personnel and spending several thousand, if not into the tens of thousands of pounds, may not be appropriate at that level of work that's being carried out. As such, there are methodologies we can employ that are significantly cheaper, but likewise, once you're onto the main construction works and you're talking of spending hundreds if not millions of pounds, then again employing these kind of tens of thousands of pounds worth of mitigation measures may be absolutely what is deemed to meet a LARP. I'm going to talk about the site UXO supervision and monitoring now. This is what's more commonly known as a watching brief, and it may be EOD engineer watching brief, i.e. a qualified UXO specialist comes to site and helps people on site with the work. There will be a toolbox talk before the work is undertaken, and then they will work very closely with the people undertaking things like trial pitting, shallow excavations, clearing in advance with a handheld magnetometer if possible, and identifying any ferrous magnetic anomaly within the ground. If an item is excavated or uncovered, the EOD engineer can give you a real-time identification of the item. For example, the thing in the machine bucket there is actually a piece of ordnance, but that could quite easily be a buried fire extinguisher, it could be a gas bottle from previous works on site, and we would identify that as an item, and then works can continue because it's not ordnance related. Anything that we find that could be potentially ordnance, we will record. It's absolutely critical that you have an audit trail of all potential or actual items so that you can share that with the project health and safety team, and again, if the forces need to come to site to do anything, you can show them exactly what you found, where you found it, and the fact that you haven't touched it, removed it, or taken it from its original location. Also, if an item is found, the EOD specialist at this point will be able to instigate the emergency response or certainly advise to the main contractor the correct methodology and who to approach at this time. You will notice on a number of these slides that I've referenced the clauses within Syria C681. So again, after the session you can reference that, that document and make sure that the conversations you're having with the UXO specialist that you're talking to meets your criteria. You can independently validate the information that they're giving you. So here, UXO Detection Survey, initially a non-intrusive survey. As a company, we use the AGS system, which is Advanced Geophysical Software. We mobilize people to site, and we can either have people carrying a frame with twin CV sensors on it. This is a cesium vapor sensors. Effectively a very, very sophisticated metal detector. These sensors can typically detect a metre wide band as you're walking across the ground. So if you've got quite a large site, we'll have to do a series of passes to provide clearance to the whole site. There's a typical survey depth. If you imagine the size of a grenade that's about the size of your fist, or the size of a mortar that's probably comparable to something like a deodorant bottle, these have quite a small magnetic signature, and actually finding these items deeper than a metre is, in our opinion, actually very, very difficult and highly improbable. Things like a 50-kilo bomb that's probably similar in size and scale to something like the Cala gas bottle you might have at home for your gas barbecue, we can detect these kind of items up to about 4 meters. And these limitations are really based upon it being a magnetically clean site. So either a greenfield site or a brownfield site that's actually had very limited previous development. Certainly not a site that has got a lot of reinforced concrete in the ground, either existing structures or demolition waste that's been spread across the ground, maybe as a piling mat or as a temporary road, or even existing services can interfere with the survey. The non-intrusive survey is very fast and cost-effective. People-mounted system, we can typically do a couple of hectares in a day. If we're towing it behind quad bikes, Argo cats, some kind of 4x4, we can cover things like 10 hectares in a day. You should get an output from the survey giving you polar coordinates of all the anomalies that you locate, and also the system that you use should be able to give you an indicative mass of the targets that you find. As I've mentioned, limitations just previously. If you're not entirely certain that the non-intrusive survey would be appropriate for your site because it's quite a heavily developed brownfield site, or there's a natural level of magnetic interference within the soil, ask the UXO specialist to come to site or do a trial. As a company, we routinely do trials on sites to determine whether the site is suitable, and that in some instances may be a free trial, in some instances it may be a paid for trial, but we'd certainly share the output with you, discuss it with you to ensure that actually the survey will perform as you intend it to. This is the kind of output you should be getting from a non-intrusive survey across the site. The false colour map here, anywhere where you've got a green colour there's no magnetic interference being picked up. And then as you start to get to the blues, the pinks, the fuchsia colours, the reds, it's where we're starting to pick up something magnetic in the ground. Now what you can see running across the top of the site is a steel fence, so there's a long linear structure there being picked up, and then also we're seeing another long linear feature marked up on this drawing as of unknown origin. At the time we didn't know what that was, but it was actually a steel reinforced footing for a wall that had been on site a number of years previously. Then you start to see discrete blobs sort of at the 3 o'clock position in one of the squares there. You can see several small red and purple blobs. These are actually discrete ferromagnetic anomalies. These are much more typical of potential ordnance or ordnance related items that you might have on site. From this, and in conjunction with the Syria guidance, we would produce a dig list. The Syria guidance gives recommendations on the percentage of anomalies that you might find that you need to investigate further. And we're not going to recommend that you clear 100% of these items, as it's highly likely that most of these items will be scrap metal. They may be pieces of rebar, they may be horseshoes, they may be anything that's been left on the site, historic uses. As such, this is the kind of dig list that you may get from a site, and on this particular project we possibly had of the order of 100 anomalies, and we've identified about 30 because of their size, because of their depth in the ground and the risk associated with the project. We've identified 30 targets that need further investigation. Hopefully you can just about make out that some of the items, when we actually exposed them, were lengths of rebar. We've got a couple of double hook bars on there, survey magnet, metal pegs, wheel bracings. So again, a lot of metal items that had been abandoned on site that were completely not ordnance. And then on this particular project, the last three items, items 28, 29 and 30, which all had large modelled masses, all turned out to be items of ordnance. And as you can see, item 30 had already partially exploded. Very rare that you would find three large bombs on a site, but obviously for the purpose of today, just to give you quite an interesting example. People will tell you non-intrusive surveys are suitable for brownfield sites, and in our opinion and in the opinion of the SIRIA guidance, that's not appropriate. This was a site that we undertook a non-intrusive survey for. The contractor had told us the site was clear of any sort of metal, and he'd put a temporary access road and a piling mat in. The piling mat included pieces of crushed reinforced concrete, it included red brick and other metal scrap. And as you can see from here, you've got very little of an area that's actually green, so with no magnetic interference. The site is virtually all reds, fuchsias, purples, indicating that you are just getting so much metal inclusions in the ground that the data's meaningless. People will tell you that they can play with the sensitivity of the survey. However, I personally and as a company we recommend, do not recommend that you change sensitivities, because if you start reducing the sensitivity, there's a chance that the small items that you're looking for would be missed anyway. It's very easy for a piece of steel in the ground to mask a small item adjacent to it. So again, that's certainly not an approach we would recommend. If you're doing piles or any kind of deep underground structure, or you want to clear maybe a deep, long, linear structure, you can undertake intrusive surveys. Where with an intrusive survey, you're actually installing a magnetometer into the ground, and this can be done with a range of techniques and from a range of platforms. The probe, as you're installing it into the ground, should have a look-ahead facility, because the last thing you want to do is push something into the ground that could potentially hit a piece of ordnance. And then once you've got down to your bomb penetration depth, you can remove the probe and start to take the survey so that you can clear a column of area around the survey centre. Again, this can be fast and cost effective. The data can be logged during the process, so you can get a very good understanding and you can interpret your results so that you know whether you've got a piece of ordnance in the ground. We use modified CPT rigs on cohesive and soft soils, and we can use drilling rigs to get through made ground, to get through very dense granular materials, and on some projects we'll use them both together, where the drilling rig will go down and drill through the made ground down to the soft cohesive soils, and then the CPT rig follows along. Again, a range of techniques, and most ground situations can be dealt with those two approaches. Again, software-based output. These are the kind of graphs that we see in real time from our sensors, and we would evaluate these before giving you clearance or otherwise on a survey location. This is a typical pile layout. The probes that Dynasafe BACTEC use, we build in-house, and we can generally clear up to about a 2-meter radius from the center of the survey. So that may allow for individual piles, it may allow for a cluster of piles to be surveyed and clearance provided. The graph on the right shows no interference from any anomalies at depth. The large squiggle at the top is due to the big metallic object that we're installing the probe with, either a drilling rig or a CPT truck, but because we've got a look-ahead facility on the probe, we can discount that squiggle as the survey's already been undertaken beyond that depth. This is the survey graph that you may get with an anomaly in the ground. So as you can see, the sort of the green highlighted area now, you're effectively seeing a north pole and a south pole from a ferromagnetic item. Where that curve crosses the curve where there's no item present, that would indicate an approximate depth of an item, and then the magnitude of the wave that's formed and in consultation with its depth allows you to model the mass of the item in the ground. So if we found a 50 kg bomb, it may have a graph very similar to the one on the screen there, but if we found something like a 10-meter long RSJ, very long, very thin, unusual shape in comparison to a piece of ordnance, the peak of those curves would be so different to that graph that we would very quickly be able to say, yes, there's a magnetic item in the ground there, but it's absolutely not ordnance related. Likewise, if you do an intrusive survey on a site and you're adjacent to existing steel reinforced piles, you're going to get an impacted survey result. And again, you'll see that from the picture on the graph there, it's so dissimilar to a potential ordnance item that again we can quickly discount that. However, picking up on existing steel items in the ground does give you potential to be masking other items, potential items of ordnance in the ground. So again, we've got additional techniques, including taking multiple surveys and comparing the data from them to try and assess and analyze whether there is something else in the ground. Again, whereas I mentioned do not play with sensitivities of non-intrusive surveys, if you don't need to clear a pile location to 2 meters with an intrusive survey, we can reduce the radius that we will provide clearance to so that we're not picking up interference from existing piles. And for an intrusive survey, that is a valid technique. Now, apologies that my very old picture here taken in 2002 and the only drilling rig I happen to have on my hard drive when building this presentation isn't quite as safe as it should be. I mentioned earlier on about the ALARP principle and spending an appropriate level of resource to mitigate your risk. If you were piling 100 piles for a £100 million high-rise tower in the centre of a city, you would expect to clear every single one of those piles locations with an intrusive survey. When you're maybe doing £10,000 worth of site investigation, it doesn't make commercial sense to mobilise that kind of equipment. What we can do to support things like boreholes for sampling, window sampling, well installation is to provide an EOD engineer to provide a downhole survey. And the downhole survey is very much a binary survey. It tells you if there's something metallic in the ground or not, but it doesn't give you any of the graphs you've had from the previous intrusive surveys. It doesn't give you any kind of estimation as to what mass is there. Perfectly acceptable for a borehole. We can say, yes, it's safe to drill here, and we would provide the safety by a stage clearance. So we might be removing the casing, lifting the casing on half-meter intervals, or we might be using a non-ferrous casing. Likewise, EOD engineers with this kind of kit and with handheld magnetometers can support things like trial pits and trenches. But I must stress that this kind of approach shouldn't really be taken for clearing pile locations or things like that. There are people out there at the minute that will give you a downhole clearance approach for pile locations. If they offer that, I would suggest you steer away from it and ask them for a proper intrusive survey. There's a range of UXO specialists, including ourselves, that can provide this kind of approach. If we get an anomaly, we locate something metallic, even with the best equipment out there, the best software for assessing the data, you can't tell what the item is until you've exposed it and visually identified it. A 50 kg bomb and a buried gas canister can give you very, very similar targets. Again, within the Syria Guide, section 7.8 explains what you should be doing, what a UXO specialist should be doing for target investigation. When we're doing target investigation, it should always be undertaken by a 2-person team. Safety is absolutely paramount at this stage. Once they identify or come across the item, they will tell you whether it's safe to continue to remove any more material so you can get a better look at it, or whether we stop work immediately. Again, we can do small excavations such as like a trial pit around an item. And in the past we've also dug quite significant shafts, as you can see in the picture there, and we've also tunnelled either horizontally or at an angle under buildings or other structures. If you've got a particularly high risk site, or the risk is of a large number of items, Dynasafe BACTEC operate a number of armoured excavators. We currently have 2 in the Falklands working on minefield clearance down there, and we've got 1 on a large project up in Scotland. The cab is designed to withstand a blast directly under the tracks, so that the operator would get out of there safely. Likewise, the banksmen in the picture on the right are only making sure the excavator gets into the right area and would of course be removed ahead of the excavation commencing. So once you've found your ordnance or your anomaly at this point, is it ordnance or is it a benign piece of metal? If it is ordnance, what type of ordnance is it? What's it likely to contain? Is it traditional explosives? May it have a chemical, biological or radiological element to it? And probably equally important, what condition is it in? Is the casing damaged? Is it leaking? Is anything getting into it? Is anything getting out of it? All these kind of factors determine whether it's safe to leave the item where it is or whether it needs some rapid mobilization of the Army bomb squad to site. Ultimately as well, what is the final disposal route? The final disposal route will always rest with the bomb squad, but they may turn around and say if you've got a commercial UXO specialist on site who's licensed to destroy items, that they can destroy the items, or they may come to site themselves, destroy the items, or more likely remove the item from site. If the item is of an ordnance nature but is now perfectly safe, it's either detonated or it's a training piece and there's no explosive content left in there, you should be issued with a free from explosive certificate, and then your item can be disposed of through a licensed scrap metal route. If it's normal scrap metal, again, you can just remove it from site and get rid of it via scrap. Absolutely critical again that the clients maintain records of all items disposed of, whether that's disposed of on site or removed from site. Another unique option for ourselves, Dynasafe BACTEC, is what is known as the bomb truck. The bomb truck has the type of chamber that you don't see at airports that suspicious packages can be put into. We have taken the initiative and installed one in the back of a road legal truck. This has been approved by the HSE, it's been approved by the police forces in the UK and the Highways Agency. This truck can come to site, and if ordnance has been designated as safe and safe for removal and doesn't exceed 8 kilos of TNT or equivalent explosive content, it can be put in the back of that blast-proof chamber and then we will take it away. We don't want to detonate the ordnance within the chamber, but we could, if required. We would rather transport it safely on the road to a licensed disposal facility. And if any of you get a moment and Google Dynasafe BACTEC on YouTube, you will see some of these chambers with actually items being demonstrated in there. And I hate to say it, but it's actually quite a dull video because the chamber doesn't shake or rock or anything. You would almost not know the blast had gone off. They contain the blast so well. The final thing you would want to consider on your project is verification reporting. You need a report to say that the UXO has been mitigated, the works that you've undertaken. As a company, we support you with the verification reporting. We would give you X and Y coordinates of all the intrusive surveys that we've undertaken. We would give you the radius of clearance. We will give you the depth of clearance that we've gone down to. Likewise, if we've done a non-intrusive survey, you would be issued with all the data from the false colour maps, from all the raw data behind that, so you know exactly what anomalies were located on your site and what follow-up activities were done. And this allows the commercial company to give you a very strong verification report and very strong information as to what tasks and what clearance activities have been undertaken. Merely getting a 2-page report saying we've come to site, we've surveyed it, we haven't found anomalies is not really an acceptable clearance report in our opinion. Even after all the clearance activities have been done and the verification reporting, we'd always recommend best practice such as permits to dig, controlling access to areas, because we may have cleared certain areas and we absolutely would stand by our clearance to the millimetre of the areas that we've cleared, but should scopes of works change, should additional work have to be undertaken and you start to operate outside of the areas that were cleared, effectively you need to start the process again from scratch. And then section 9 of Series C681 tells you how to appoint a UXO specialist. The key thing here is absolutely understand what the requirement is for your project, what has been identified as a potential risk and to what level of severity. Make sure the company that you're talking to can meet these requirements and that they have the absolutely appropriate techniques for dealing with these. Ask them to see outputs of data they've provided in the past, reports or clearance certificates from previous projects. Do a little bit of due diligence, check their qualifications, check their experience. Have they got a track record in delivering projects such as you're involved with? And if necessary, ask them to undertake a trial. Likewise, you can have third parties check them and advise as to whether or not they are suitable to take the works on that you're asking them to. Do they employ in-house EOD staff or do they use freelance people? The best contractors out there directly employ their own staff. They know who the best people out there are. They know what these people have been trained in, what they are fit to deal with. Whereas people that bring in freelance people, the quality may or may not be there. Likewise, check the insurance levels that they're offering, what kind of warranties, what kind of guarantees will they give to your project and the project team. And likewise, testimonials. If you work for a big practice and you know that other companies other departments or other offices have dealt with UXO in the past, who did they use? Did they do a good project for them? Likewise, people from your network or other people may be able to recommend people that they've used in the past. These are my contact details. We're on LinkedIn. We try and post articles relating to UXO finds, best practice regularly. But if you have any questions, if you would wish to commission a preliminary or a detailed risk assessment, then please contact the Groundsure Insights account manager. Okay, thank you. That ends the my sort of presentation session, so it's the question and answer session now. Okay, we aren't showing any questions in the box here. I'm hoping that means that I've gone through things quite comprehensively and it's not an IT issue. I'm around for another 5 minutes now. If anybody wants to submit any questions, please feel free to do so. Okay, our first question, Paul Hollinghurst, thank you for that. On one of the earlier slides, the site where the UXO was found, why was that area of site not cleared beforehand? Okay, I am guessing you're either relating to the Birmingham or the London bomb. There's no legal requirement to check for ordnance, and it may be that the site historically people didn't know there was ordnance there, or it may be on on an area of site that wasn't previously redeveloped. So as the work is now being commissioned for the project that's on site, it's really down to the design team and the contract delivery team to really assess the risk and to check for ordnance. The reason that it probably wouldn't have been found is it's just not been looked for. Again, the one in Birmingham was actually found in what historically had been a back garden of a row of terraced houses. And again, buildings had been demolished around the terraced houses, and it was only now, as this particular site has come forward, that the houses were demolished and excavations in those areas were considered. I hope that kind of answers that, Paul. With another question, Roberta McAllister. Have there been any UXOs which have been set off accidentally in the UK in the last 10 years or so? We're not aware of any large items such as the airdropped Luftwaffe, sort of the 50 kg, the 250 kg, 500 kgs. No recorded incidents of those that I'm aware of. However, small items, we are aware of a handful of projects where things like a phosphorus grenade or maybe an incendiary bomb has been uncovered. It's sat in the ground for a number of years, perfectly benign, and as it's been excavated, either maybe the tooth of a bucket has caught it and caused a partial detonation or ignition of combustible material. So we are aware of incidents where there's been sort of a plume of smoke has come up, and potentially that may have caused small injuries to people involved with the work. Likewise, going back with the larger bombs, we are aware of projects where the bombs have been uncovered and then the chemical fuse has started to partially ignite again. So there are evidence instances out there, but these things are very rarely recorded, and if they are recorded, are often not recorded as UXO related, but sort of as a chemical incident. So thank you for that. Next question is Stuart Wagstaff. Can you clarify that there is no legal requirement to undertake a UXO scan even if there is a perceived risk? If you have done a detailed risk assessment and you have identified that there is a medium or a high risk on site, then you should be taking mitigation activities. It's not a legal requirement, it is best practice in accordance with the Syria and various other guidances out there. If you have identified a low risk, then the best practice is really make sure the guys and girls out on site have had a toolbox talk, are aware of this risk, but you don't need to do anything else unless you uncover an item. Hopefully that answers that, Stuart. Tom Collins, is there, oh, this is the final question we've got time for. The rest, I will make a note of them, we will answer them, and Groundsure will email them out to all the attendees today. So the final question was from Tom. Is there an industry method for relating bomb penetration depth to anticipated geology? This is a very good question because it's up for a debate quite a lot. In the Syria guidance, there is a section on typical depths bombs have been found at based on empirical observations. So it may say under a cohesive soil you will find them between 0 down to 12 meters. It may say under a chalk you'll find them 2 meters to 8 meters. These are quite large bands and they're not the most scientific approach. However, they are based on where bombs have been found. Primarily during the Second World War, the teams at the time would uncover these bombs, they would record the depth, all this information was tabulated. The guidance is quite simple because it assumes one soil type for the whole of the depth, whereas we know in reality you're probably going to have a layer of made ground of varying depth at the surface, then you may have various different bands before you get to the final bomb penetration depth. So for us to be compliant with the Syria guidance, we use that information provided in the table and use the worst case scenario. This can in some instances give you a depth that is possibly deeper than you would actually find the item, but in terms of having a factor of safety in there, it's perfectly sort of acceptable to use this. We have on very large projects where the client is prepared to fund additional research, we've undertaken detailed studies where we've used the exact borehole information from the site on there. We've gone to very complicated calculations and equations provided by various studies to try and provide a better bomb penetration depth specific to that project. And in certain instances, we have been able to reduce the bomb penetration depth by a number of meters and therefore maybe take some construction underground out of the risk zone. But as a standard, that isn't something that anybody is offering. But on a large project with a bespoke requirement, it's certainly something that we can look at. Okay, going to have to end it there. Thank you all very much for attending. Like I say, we will download the rest of the questions now and we'll answer these and we'll get them back out to you shortly. Thanks a lot for your time. Thank you.